Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada, and this episode is brought to you by Omnovos, Canada's retail customer engagement solutions provider. Combine all of your customer data into a single view to create real-time, personalized connections with your customers in our new contactless world. Learn more at www.realcustomerengagement.com. On this episode, we meet Andrew Tepperman, president of Tepperman's, who takes us through the long, rich history of this Ontario-based furniture retailer that draws on decades of experience serving customers, plus modern brand and format innovation to compete in a crowded category. Next, I catch up with Matthew Dixon, Chief Product and Research Officer for Austin-based AI venture Tether, author of 3 Amazon and Wall Street Journal best-selling books on customer service, sales, loyalty. We talk about the impact the COVID crisis has had on customer service, call centers, and ultimately customer satisfaction and loyalty. But first, let's check in with Andrew from Tepperman's. Andrew, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's great to speak with you. I'd rather, in some ways, be seeing you in person, but in the current circumstance, wonderful to be able to touch base with you and learn more about Tepperman's, the business, and the strategy. It's certainly interesting days. Why don't we start at the beginning? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey in the business, your role, and all about Tepperman's.
Sure. Well, I hope you have a couple hours because we just celebrated our 95th anniversary. So this might be a while.
For sure.
Well, like a lot of family businesses out there, I worked there when I was a kid in elementary school, going in on the weekends, sweeping, doing all of that. And then I went to high school in Toronto, but during breaks I would come back and kind of do some more difficult jobs. I was a delivery driver. I worked in the customer care department, et cetera. And then I left for New York for university for a number of years. And then I stayed in the U.S. and worked for a furniture manufacturer until the immigration, the INS, caught me and deported me. But the company wanted to keep me. So they moved me to their head office in Montreal. And I worked there for a year until I could get to return to the U.S. And I moved to Tennessee, enjoyed it down there. And then our family took over a very large retailer in London, Ontario. So at that point, it was a perfect time if I was going to come back then. And so I was the general manager there for a number of years and then worked in different areas in management. It was a warehouse manager, an operations manager. And eventually in 2006, my father retired and I became president. But what was really interesting was in the year 2000, my father announced to the company that he was going to retire on October 31st, 2006. He picked the day 6 years in advance. A lot of companies don't have that luxury, I think, of planning like this, but we did an exceptional job, 6 years for the transition planning. And then in 2006, I took over. My brother was a secretary treasurer, and we just continued to learn, evolve, and grow.
Well, it's a fantastic story because you really kind of grew up outside of the business, but inside of the business and really can bring both that external wisdom and that deep connection. Tell us about Tepperman's. Where are you based, and how many locations do you have? Give us a sense of the business itself.
Sure. So my grandfather came over from Russia in 1920, did some odd jobs, and eventually made it. He landed in Halifax, like a lot of the immigrants did. Eventually made it to Windsor. We think he may have been trying to cross the border. We're not sure. But he set up shop. Originally, he went door to door selling blankets and towels, and then eventually opened up his first store, grew, opened up a larger one, and then over the number of years, he just kept growing, really making a name for himself in Windsor. Unfortunately, he drowned in 1970 when he was on vacation.
Oh my goodness!
So my father was kind of thrust into the business, and it's kind of a coincidence, but my father took over as president when he was 36. As did I in 2006. But it's really been a great growth story too. So we were very slow to grow, and it took forever, but we went to Chatham and then eventually went to Sarnia, London, Kitchener, and most recently in Ancaster. And we run 2 banners. One is the Tepperman's banner, and the second is sort of an off-price banner it used to be called the Bargain Annex for about 35 years. And then last year we rebranded it and we now call it the Outlet at Tepperman's. One of the most unique things about our business, and we followed this same kind of model for 95 years, is that we offer credit, but we do it ourselves. We don't go to a third-party finance company. And so it's really allowed us to have a different type of relationship with our customers and create a different type of loyalty.
So you own that book of business, which means you can allow a little bit of flexibility when people need help, and with that holistic perspective that there'll be a repeat customer, right? Because sometimes I know what you mean, because sometimes if it's a financing company, they have their own metrics to hit, and they're not always so concerned about the next purchase at the business. They want their financing paid now. I guess it gives you a little bit of that flexibility to manage the customer relationship over the longer term.
Exactly. And we really noticed this in 2009 during the recession, where we had a little, for us, we knew a lot of people were going to be delinquent and late on their payments or bankrupt. So our message to our customers was, listen, if you owe us $40, can you give us a toonie or $5 just to show that you're committed? And no problems. We're not going to destroy your credit rating, but just show that you're going to eventually be with us long term. And we won so much loyalty over that. Customers were sending us flowers and stuffed animals and things. They were just so appreciative.
It's such a savvy approach. I mean, it really shows the longitudinal, long run perspective of the business, right?
Oh yeah.
You still got to hit your numbers. You're still going to have bad debts, but it's a broader, as I said, more holistic. It's still interesting. And I think you also did some rebranding a couple of years ago, where the look, if not the name, but the look, and as you said, you converted one of the other banners to an entire different name. Take me through that. Why did you think now was the time to have a second look at the way you presented yourself in the market?
So if you go back 95 years and you look in our archives or on the walls of our history walls at the head office, you'll see rebranding every 10 to 12 years. It's incredible. So this is just a natural evolution for us. And there's usually like a defining moment why we rebrand. The latest rebrand had to do with opening in Kitchener and hiring a marketing firm to give us some ideas what to do in a new market. And one of the first things they said, they looked at our logo and they said, it's not really great. Maybe for Windsor it's great, but as you head into the bigger cities, it's kind of hokey. So it really got us to think differently about how we present ourselves. And at the same time, we had just opened up this Kitchener store, which was a completely different type of shopping experience. It's a very different look than our other locations. In fact, we tried to move our London store, the same look, into Kitchener. And our London store in 2009 had won Building of the Year. So we thought, it's beautiful. This is going to be a great addition to Kitchener. The city council looked at it and said, absolutely not. You're not putting that monstrosity in our city. So we had to then very quickly hire a designer. And in the furniture industry, there was a well-known designer, Martin Roberts, out of New York. So we brought him in, and he developed this beautiful look for us, which was our Kitchener store. So we opened that, and at the same time, then we got this advice: you better change your logo. So we changed our logo, and it was such a great shopping experience there that we then started redoing all of our showrooms. So we spent the next 3 years updating everything, including with the new logo. And then recently, about a year ago, we updated our Bargain Annex outlet to outlet at Tepperman's.
So what was so different about it? If you could encapsulate the change that was so dramatically different about the shopping experience or the physicality of it, what was it, the before and after?
Well, yeah. So there's those subconscious things, like when you're pulling up to a building, how does it look? Well, we use different types of materials on the exterior, metals, and like fake wood look. We repainted everything with a lighter color, restriped everything. So we just made the outside look great. We also put in electric car chargers, like courtesy car chargers, free to use in all of our locations, which ties into one of our 6 guiding principles about being a great environmental company. And then when you walk inside, we completely changed all the lighting. So it's very bright, it's inviting. We put in cafes, so we serve free coffee all day, free popcorn all day. We create a little kids area, so you can drop your kids off, give them some popcorn, they can watch a movie or color. And originally when we were in Kitchener, we looked at the amount of time customers stay in the store, and they were spending more time when they could leave their kids, and the kids didn't bother them. And so everything from we created defined pathways in the store, which we never had. There was sort of this way of thinking in the furniture industry, which is if you create defined pathways, you're taking up very valuable real estate, and you're stuck. And but we found that it really opened it up, and it created a better flow for the customer too. We also added like digital signage, digital kiosks that customers could explore on. So and then we created a great pickup system where I think customer pickups are sort of a secondary thought for a lot of retailers. We wanted to put our best foot forward. We created the most incredible drive-through. I've never seen one as good as ours in our industry, and I travel all over North America looking at these. But we invested in canopies, so if it's raining or snowing, you're taken care of. It's like a Tim Hortons drive-through. Actually, you pull in, the window opens, you tell them your number, and in about 5 minutes, your product's in your car.
It's such an interesting point. I just got off another interview for another episode with another Andrew, actually, Andrew Resnick, who's in operations. He was my COO when I was a CMO of a company. So we're just chatting about on the podcast about operations and how retailers need to, this curbside is now huge. It's a huge thing, both for some as a lifeline, but consumers love it. But if you don't operationalize it with the same passion that you do with the rest of the holistic experience, it becomes this offshoot of, I gotta take stuff out to the parking lot now, as opposed to what you sound like you did is let's make this part of the consumer experience and make it as great as an experience as we possibly can.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic.
Some of the areas even have lounges. You can walk in, sit down, watch TV, grab a water. So it's really like if I was to look at everything, the experience. It's really important, that experience. A lot of us, we sell products that are commodities or that you can buy online. So we really have to keep looking for ways to create value when the customer comes to our stores.
Well, that's a great segue into the question. I want to know or explore a little bit. You're in an industry that is facing or continue to face disruption. You've got some big online players that have changed the math a little bit and certainly changed the competitive set. As you and your team sat in 2019, I call it the before time, pre-COVID. Let's start there. As you sat in 2019 and said, okay, here's our strategy to compete moving forward. We just rebranded. What were those 2 or 3 kind of key things you were thinking of? And to give you a sense of the next question, it's going to be, okay, what's different what's going to be different in the COVID era? But let's go back to 2019, the before time, and say, okay, here's where we think 1, 2, or 3 key things that we're going to do moving forward to continue our success.
So what was interesting in 2019, we started out weak and then really kicked into gear, probably August or September. So we were really disappointed when COVID hit because our year end is March 31st and we were on an incredible roll at that point, especially because that was our 95th anniversary month as well. So when we were thinking about 2020, what we were going to do back then, I mean, there were definitely big themes. Technology. And that's not just in an IT department, but it's everywhere. How do we leverage it better? When we were shut down for COVID, it really got us to fast track some of the projects too. We upgraded our website. We added a chat feature. So just anything we could do to make the experience better and more efficient and faster. So technology is always top of mind right now. I think that I mentioned before the experiences, and it's not just the customer experience, but it's also our staff experience. A lot of people like we have 6 guiding principles at our company, and the number one principle is to create an awesome staff experience. When that happens, when they feel good, when they feel confident, it transcends to an incredible customer experience. So we're always looking at the staff experience. Also, things like supply chain. And the science of supply chain, that was high up on our radar. It's shifting so much, different countries, there's trade wars, there's raw material issues, costing. So we use a forecasting software that links into our ERP system. So we're always looking how to maximize that. Marketing shifts as well would have been way up there. A lot of us have been doing traditional marketing forever, but it's shifting very quickly, as we know, to the online world. So, and it's a combination of, what can you do in-house with the skill sets you have? And then how do you layer on external skill sets from different firms to help grow that area? So we did a little bit of both. And training was really important for us too, specifically leadership training. We're on a multi-year management training using emotional intelligence right now to really talk differently and communicate differently with our teams.
Okay, so now all great stuff, and in fact, it's a great discussion because it highlights things weren't exactly stable before COVID either from a supply chain perspective. Yeah. Well, they certainly are less stable. Certainly, the market is stable in some ways. Yeah. COVID has acted as a catalyst, accelerator, sledgehammer, shockwave. I'm running out of adjectives, but as you sit now, what are we, 12, 14 weeks into what could be a couple of years of the COVID era, maybe not as intense as it was earlier on, but, we could be in and out of this thing for a long time. How are you thinking differently about the business? What in your mind has changed? If anything, you already sound like you're on a very progressive path, but is there anything that comes to mind that you said, we're going to do something very different now?
Well, short-term safety is still a top priority right now. Safety of our staff and safety of our customers. So everything that we're doing, we're looking at that very closely. We do home deliveries, so we have to be very careful with our drivers and in-home technician visits. So that's by far the number one thing. The second thing would be how do we catch up from what we lost during the 9-week shutdown? So, and this becomes tough because you need inventory, and the supply chains are all disrupted around the world right now. So, really driving revenue right now is probably well up there as a top project for the whole company. We reopened on May the 21st. The government gave us the okay to open on May 19th, but we actually took 2 days, paid everyone to come in, and we wanted to reorient them back into the work environment, teach them about safety protocols, and that really paid off well. So when we opened our doors on May 21st, our staff were really confident in what we were doing, and the customers kind of fed into that. And so it's been really busy since we opened on May 21st.
Well, I love the idea. I was doing a media interview yesterday, and I was saying, listen, it's a lot easier to close a business than it is to start it up again. And you just kind of highlighted that, right? Yeah. Just take your time, set new principles. Maybe it's flow. It's interesting, right? You had already set a flow in the showroom, so to speak. Now you've got some new principles. One of the things I wanted to talk about was, and I've been trying to get a sense from everyone in the before time. We would travel around the world. Your merchants would travel around the world. You would, even in Canada, and meet new vendors, see new styles, see new products, do all those great things. Off to China to meet new manufacturers, whatever it was, India, wherever it was. How are you thinking about that for 2021 and the end part of the year? Are you looking at virtually meeting people? Like, what's your sense of how you can do that?
So, what's really interesting with this is there are probably 4 main furniture shows in the U.S. every year, 2 in High Point, North Carolina, and 2 in Las Vegas. So the last show for the world basically was in February in Las Vegas before the shutdown. Just by coincidence, we had too much on our plate. We've never missed a show anywhere, but for some reason, we just could not go to this show in February. So it forced our team to work with all of our factory reps in Las Vegas virtually. So this was before we even shut down and knew there was going to be a problem. So it kind of helped out with some of that, the evolution and the change once the shutdown occurred. So yes, we've been working virtually with a lot of our suppliers. And it really differs because with a lot of retailers in our industry in Canada, there's a mix between domestic suppliers from Canada, U.S. suppliers, and imports. Everyone's treated a little differently. The U.S. suppliers and foreign suppliers can't come into Canada right now, and vice versa. But domestic, we have domestic suppliers who are visiting our head office right now and meeting with our buyers. But the virtual is really what we're having to do right now. We're having to lock up, SKUs and different vendors and lines virtually. So it's very different for us. But it seems to be working okay. One thing though it's tough if you're a new supplier today is that you don't know, as a retailer, we don't know really what the quality is, or really what the manufacturing deadlines are going to be like. So we're not as open to test new suppliers. We're really sticking to the known entities.
Yeah, it's really in your category and others. Like, what's the fit and finish, right? What's the fit and finish of the manufactured product versus the nice sample I see? I mean, that's always a risk anyway, right? Nice sample on the showroom floor, and you get the first 1,000 units. You're like, it wasn't quite put together the way we thought.
No, and we've also had to, with some of the supply issues, we've had to do some things differently. So in the past, where we might have been pulling truckloads out of Toronto of appliances or electronics, we've had to go now overseas directly. Same companies, same suppliers, but just buying container loads so we could better control our supply chain.
Oh, interesting. And that reflects some conversations I've had with retailers who are saying, listen, I'm putting more of an emphasis on less about SKU proliferation or expansion and more about, I don't know how to forecast the future quite so well anymore. Yeah. So let's be nimble. Let's be flexible. Sometimes that's more liquidity in the business. Sometimes that's, I'm going to hold more inventory than I might ordinarily like.
Yes.
But it gives you a lot of flexibility. It sounds like that's the kind of the path
that's actually a good point where you just said you might hold more inventory than normal. So we belong to a number of retailer groups in the U.S. specifically, and it feels like they're a couple weeks ahead of us in terms of understanding the consumer demand. And so for them, demand is off the charts right now in our industry in the U.S. So we're listening and watching this very closely, and we're now loading up, I would say, more than what's typical in terms of the lead times for products that we're ordering.
Well, it's been a great exploration of the brand. I love everything you're doing. It sounds so fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing it with me. How can people learn more about Tepperman's or get in touch with you, LinkedIn, or any of that stuff? What's the best way to do that?
I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. We have a website that we just updated, so it's a pretty good experience if you go on. We do a lot in the community too. So if you explore us on Google, you'll see a lot of the things that we're doing. Yeah, and we're in the 6 markets. We go as close to about an hour out of Toronto in Hamilton. That would be our closest.
Go ahead.
Sorry, my one big learning or my one big takeaway from this whole COVID thing is early on, I have a brother who's not in the business. He lives in Brooklyn, New York. They were having a lot of problems there. He could not buy a freezer. So it was going to be 5 months for him to get a freezer, and he was sick of waiting in line. So I shipped him a freezer that was $300, and it cost me $900 to get to him.
But hey, listen, everybody needed suddenly chest freezers. I talked to a good friend of mine who they just ate out all the time, and I'm like, because I'm shopping every day. I'm like, why are you doing that? He says, "Oh, I don't have I couldn't believe you don't have a freezer."
I know.
It's the key to my house, for God's sakes. If that freezer goes, I'm in trouble. I can't wait.
We had such a run on them. Yeah,
I can imagine. It actually brings up one question I did want to ask.
Sure.
In terms of what's next, you talked about your people, and in speaking with some of your team, you're actually looking for talent, and you're always, is there any new talent specifically you're looking for in general? Like where do you need some help, and as you progress?
Yep. So, talent's really important, obviously, for most of our businesses. I would say marketing right now would have more of the voids and more of the open positions we're trying to recruit for. Everything from a director to an e-com manager, media, buyers. It's pretty much all over the place in marketing. IT, we're in technology, we're pretty good, but it's always, like I mentioned before, it's a balance. what can you outsource and what do you have, what kind of skill sets do you have inside? But yeah, marketing really jumps out right now. It's always been tough for us in Windsor. Right. It's hard to get that talent here. And we've had people walk away when they've said they have to live in Windsor. So we've actually have some senior positions now who are based in London. And we even have one director who's based in Milton, and we don't have any stores in Milton. So we're trying to become more flexible now with these positions, where they live and and how they manage their days.
Okay. Well, if anyone listening needs more information about that, they can visit the site, I'm sure, or ping you on LinkedIn, and they can learn more. So thank you for that. Well, listen, Once again, thanks again so much for joining me on The Voice of Retail. It was great to catch up. Learn more about the business, and I wish you much success for the rest of the year and continued run of what a great run for a great Canadian company. So thanks again for joining me on The Voice of Retail.
Thank you. And I wish all the retailers out there a lot of success, because it's really tough right now.
Matt, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing today?
Good, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Well, you and I got to actually meet virtually, so to speak, thanks to our friends at Salesforce, who had us on a panel, and it was such a great conversation. We kind of took over the panel, you and I, because it
was a blast.
Everything fell into the background. We had such a great conversation. I want to be able to continue the conversation here on the podcast. So thanks for joining me. Why don't we start? If you could tell us about yourself, your journey up to and including your role now as Chief Product Research Officer at Tether.
Sure. Yeah. So my background is I've come from a research background. Actually, I got a doctorate in political economy, and then decided 51% of the way through my program that I didn't want to have anything to do with higher education, but fell victim to the sunken cost fallacy. And so I ended up sticking it out and finishing up. And I went immediately into private sector research. I signed on with a company called Corporate Executive Board, which then became CEB. And in 2017, that company was actually sold to Gartner. So it's a big division of Gartner. Basically a subscription-based research business. We worked with big companies around the world, functional leaders like heads of marketing, heads of finance, heads of HR, et cetera. And we did syndicated or strategic research on their behalf, benchmarking, provided advisory work, et cetera. And so I ran the practices that served chief customer officers, chief contact center officers, so heads of customer service, as well as sales officers. Is primarily focused on B2B sales. And during that time, that was where I spent the bulk of my time at CEB. I was there for about 18 years, and I spent the bulk of my time running those practice areas, and we were able to put out a few books and some articles in HBR around some of the research we've done, which maybe we'll talk about in this conversation. On the customer experience side, I think the piece most folks are familiar with is the effortless experience, where the customer effort score and all this whole idea of reducing friction and reducing customer effort comes from. And on the sales side, we are the piece we're best known for is the Challenger sale, which looked at kind of profiles of B2B sellers and what makes for great sales performance. I left CEB in 2017 and joined a startup in Austin, Texas called Tether, where I head up product and research. And what we're really doing is putting a lot of these concepts into action. So we're using unstructured data. So for instance, imagine a company's call center interactions with its customers, or their chat interactions or email interactions. We're using that unstructured data to help those companies, Tether's customers, find where effort exists in their service experience and in their digital experience, and help them do something about it. So we're also using machine learning to understand what it is that best sellers are saying and doing that leads to their performance, or to the performance gap between them and average performers. So pretty exciting stuff, but it's kind of like being a kid in a candy store, being able to apply a modern technology to a lot of the ideas that we wrote about over many years at CEB.
Well, you skipped over it kind of quick, but really those two books of yours is actually how I first came to know your name. A client of mine, great client of mine, Michelle Siwa from Blue Stars, just the books were so aligned with his philosophy around, for God's sake, stop asking what's keeping people up at night. You asking them what's keeping them up at night is keeping them up at night, and go go into the conversation with value, more value added. So I just wanted to give a shout out. I mean, those two books were so important. And I didn't want to gloss over that too quickly, because they're very important. It's really changed philosophically. It was just such a big change, and led to becoming an informed group of people who would talk to other informed groups of people and bring value to the conversation. So it really was a milestone set of books. On that, just let's hang on that for a sec. What was the insight that drove that for you? Was it just this 18 years of experience of talking to people who were doing it better than others and being more successful? Is that a thread or a theme that I'm picking up overall in the work that you do?
Yeah, it's interesting. I one of the things that, so you mentioned before the research around sales, so in the Challenger sale, and this idea, which you put very well, is in a nutshell, this is a story of how do we as salespeople who have been taught for now decades to go in and ask the customer what's keeping you up at night, and then we hope the customer says something that we can hook our product or our solution to, right? And therefore solve a problem they have. And the argument is that was a great way to sell before the internet, and before customers became really empowered with information. Today, it's just a grind and a burden for the customer to be asked what's keeping them up at night. They've already decided what's keeping them up at night, and that's, they've reached out to you and they're very far down the purchase journey. So the best sellers today do exactly what you said. They bring more value. They come in with an idea around what should be keeping that customer up at night, and they come with a hypothesis. And oftentimes that point of view they have is provocative and it's surprising. In the Effortless experience, we wrote about customer experience interactions or customer service interactions as a key moment of truth in the customer experience. And, a lot of the conventional wisdom out there is when things go wrong, we've got to surprise and delight our customers. And what we found was actually when you tested with data that customers whose expectations are exceeded are actually no more loyal to brands than those whose expectations are simply met. And that, in fact, most service interactions actually create customer disloyalty, not loyalty. So, pardon the sports metaphor in a time where there are no sports, but maybe that's the best we can do. But the better strategy in customer service is to play offense and try to delight people when things go wrong, but to rather play great defense and to make the service interaction easier than you're making it right now, and thereby eliminate sources of friction in customer effort and reduce the natural disloyalty effect that service interactions tend to have. Those two books, I think, to your question, what's interesting, and a lot of people will ask me, well, how many times have you run sales organizations, or how big are the call centers you run? Right. I've never done either of those jobs, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who do that day in and day out, because those are very hard jobs. I come from a research perspective, and I actually think that's what makes the content unique in the marketplace. So I'm not, when I'm bringing findings out, I'm not writing from the perspective of, hey, here's what works for Matt, or here's my personal rules of success in delivering great customer experience. I'm coming from a database perspective. And one of the things I've always found frustrating in both of those areas, sales and customer experience, is that there's just so much conventional wisdom out there that people kind of glom onto. And, all you've got to do is pull up the Amazon page of sales books or customer experience books. And what you'll find is, everything in the sales section there's not very much data. It's a lot of personal opinion. It's a lot of people writing about what's worked for them personally and led to their outsized performance. In the customer experience space, it's a lot of conventional wisdom around, surprise and delight and moments of wow and this kind of thing. And these things, I think, are so taken for granted, some of these assumptions, that nobody ever stopped to test them with data. But I think that's what makes it unique, is that, we are bringing data and science to bear to test some of these things that leaders and managers have always taken for granted, but really never stopped to study in any rigorous kind of way.
Well, it's always been the criticism of books, the good to great books where they tell a story of a business that turned itself around, is that it's so idiosyncratic, it's hard to learn a lesson from it. I want to be the next Apple retail store. Okay, everybody does. It's hard to learn either tactical questions because every circumstance is so different. Speaking of which, and it's a great segue, when I think about loyalty and I think about retail and I think about the before time, and I call the before time before COVID, which is, feels like a long time ago, but let's say you're sitting around in late 2019, you're thinking about the future of loyalty, of customer service, of all the things you think about. It's not exactly a boring time either, right? There is a lot of disruption happening. in the market pre-COVID. COVID just accelerated, amplified, blew up, or whatever. But you already had a fair bit of disruption. What were you thinking about in 2019? And where I'm going with this is, what's different, or what in your mind has changed, and how are you thinking differently in the COVID era? So, as you said in 2019, what were those kind of themes that you were thinking of that was going to have to be in place for people to be successful? And then, is anything different in the way you're thinking about it today?
Great question. And we talked a little bit about this at the Salesforce roundtable. And I've stolen shamelessly your term, which is, certain trends I think have been shot through the tunnel of time post-COVID. And I think it's a great way to put it, because really what I have seen, if you let's look at customer service for a moment, what I've seen going on there, it's not that COVID brought on completely new things, unexpected things in the customer experience. But I think what it did was it took some of these things that were on simmer and moved them to a high boil, or shot it through the tunnel of time. So a couple of examples that I talk about. One is digital as a component of the service experience, particularly. So, at least in the States, there's been quite a bit written about it. I had this experience myself just the other day of waiting, facing a 2 to 3 hour hold time with my bank versus, going online. Now, I thought I was calling about suspected fraud on an account. I thought it was a fairly urgent thing, and they want to get to it in faster than 2 to 3 hours. But they're overwhelmed. They've lost their overflow support because they've shut down their offshore contact center, and so they've got fewer reps handling a lot of customer calls. And and you've got all these customers now in financial duress, so they're reaching out to their banks for to take advantage of government programs.
Or the algorithms are going a bit crazy, right? Because people are shopping. I heard this from some of the folks I spoke to, that the way we're buying things looks like fraud to a machine right now.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah. Who buys 50 pounds of flour?
Yeah, right. and then the next day you bought another 50 pounds of toilet paper. So this must be fraud. And so people's credit cards have been cutting off left, right, and center. So sorry, just jump in.
It's a great point. But so you've got all these issues. You got issues like that. You've got a lot of customers in financial duress having to reach out to their utility provider, to their bank, to their, whatever the company is. You've got customers reaching out in droves to their cable provider because they've realized that they need higher bandwidth to be able to work effectively from home. And now they've got all their kids and their spouses, also homeschooling and virtual learning, all this stuff. And I need to pay for more internet speed, but I can't get a technician out for 2 weeks because they're so backlogged. But you've got this going on. So you're finding, I think, a lot of customers going to digital who may have their knee-jerk reaction may have been to pick up the phone. And what that's forcing companies to reckon with is that many of them have underinvested in some of these capabilities. Their websites are hard to navigate. Their apps are clunky. Their chat agents are only equipped to handle very kind of binary yes/no types of questions, like pricing and availability and shipping speeds and stuff like that. But they can't handle immersive dialogue like what you might have in on a phone call. And so it's really forcing companies to accelerate investment in digital in a way that, before they were just they were noodling on, and they saw, things like chat and customer shipped into digital was on a slow march, more and more every month, every year. But now you've seen this massive spike in customers turning to digital first because they don't want to have to deal with the headache of trying to talk to a live rep. So that's one. I think the second one is around agent empowerment. So what we've found historically in most service organizations is they've been kind of run like factory floors. So here's an army of headset wearing agents. They're told to follow the script. They're surrounded by managers and seasoned colleagues who they can tap on the shoulder or flag down if they get stuck. But they're kind of in a nice, safe cocoon, and you can bring on an early or less tenured person or new hire, and they can kind of get down the learning curve with the help of their friends. Now, when they're all left to their own devices at home and there's no manager to flag down, there's no colleagues tap on the shoulder, these agents are having to figure things out on their own. And what happens is that when you put those agents in an environment where you're asking them to use their own judgment, but they've grown up in an environment where they're told what to do and what to say and how to say it.
Just the opposite, right? It's very rigorous, rigorously measured. It's very, very controlled.
Exactly. And so I think you've seen some companies. We wrote about T-Mobile and their move to more of an agent empowerment kind of model a couple of years ago in an article in HBR called Reinventing Customer Service. That at the time, and this was late 2018, was sort of a crazy lunatic fringe way of running customer service, completely antithetical to anything. Now it's like the way you have to run customer service. You don't, even small things like I was talking to a head of customer experience from a U.S. retailer the other day, and she told me, it's funny, we had work from home as a pilot program that we had been debating as a leadership team for 2 years, trying to get then all of a sudden COVID happens and 1 week and everyone's at home. And and that has had all kinds of implications for not just the way they manage their talent, their metrics, their performance management, their coaching model, but even like technology that they hadn't invested in yet. They didn't have a cloud-based, CCaaS platform. So their reps were, everything was on premise, and suddenly they had to switch gears because reps working from home need, availability to the same systems they have in the call center. So anyway, those are a couple of the customer experience trends that I see kind of shot through the tunnel of time. On the sales side, the one I might suggest is, I think virtual selling has always been a thing. It's funny. I was talking to a head of sales at a large Fortune 50 U.S. manufacturing company, very old school manufacturer that, had always been a feet on the street, burning a lot of jet fuel kind of sales organization, a lot of field sellers. And he said when COVID hit, we had a lot of these sellers kind of deer in the headlights, suddenly claiming they were struggling with, with Zoom and virtual selling. And this head of sales said, I went back and looked at the data. It turned out that every single year, a higher percentage of our sales interactions with customers were happening over the phone, over Zoom, over WebEx anyway. And so this is, again, just a thing that, yes, now it's 100%. Before it was maybe 50 or 60%, but make no mistake, we've been doing this for a while. And so I think there's a lot of hand-wringing going on in sales right now about how to sell effectively virtually, but almost every sales organization I know has been selling virtually as some percentage of their sales interactions for at least 5 years now.
Together, we've been watching, and of course, we've been experiencing anecdotally the changes that have COVID brought on. And I'm always hesitant to say, this has changed everything, because it's very rarely true. But it's probably the case, curious to get your perspective, that COVID has changed in that either amplification or catalyst some things, potentially forever. And I guess the question in my mind is often how much of this is going to be a temporary adjustment to current circumstances versus how much of this is going to stick. And as you said, it's a great example. Like, people were already doing business via Zoom. And I went through this discussion before around 9/11, right? At the same, broad reasons. We're not going to get on airplanes as much. We're not going to travel. All of a sudden we were buying, very expensive, horribly expensive at the time, video teleconferencing that basically just grew a bunch of cobwebs a year later. Yeah. So not much of it seemed to stick. I mean, flying and traveling around, as you described it, burning jet fuel, got back to record levels. But does this feel different? Does this feel like some of this is going to stick differently, both from a consumer behavior and loyalty perspective, and then from from the other side about how operations are run in the world that you look at?
Yeah, I think some of it will. I think some of it will stick. I think what's going to happen is take sales interactions, for instance. This company I was talking to said we were on this steady march where he had to go back several years in the CRM system. He said the best I could tell, we were doing like 5 or 10 of our interactions were virtual anyway. And then, the next year is 15%, the next year is 25%, and it's sort of slowly marched. And then COVID hit, and it's 100%. Now, he said, but because of their business and because they, part of the sale is actually being on the factory floor with managers in the customer organization, looking at the machinery, diagnosing how new systems and solutions would be deployed, what efficiencies they would create. It's just hard to do that on a Zoom without actually being on the factory floor. But he did say, I don't think it's going to stay at 100%. But I do think the new normal is if before COVID we were at 50 or 60% of our calls were happening on Zoom anyway, and now we're at 100%, I think it's probably going to settle around 75%. And the reason is, he said, I think customers are realizing this is just an easier way to do business. Like, I don't need to schedule time to meet with a seller who's going to be coming out to visit. We can thread the needle of the calendar and get folks from different locations plugged in for a sales call. If it's not a have to be on the factory floor kind of thing, let's do it on Zoom, because it's just more customer friendly. And, candidly, he also said our sellers are more productive that way too. So, if I'm in California one day meeting with a customer and then I've got to get to Toronto the next day, I mean, there's a lot of downtime. Yeah. So, versus being able to talk to the customer in California 1 hour and then the next hour be on the phone with your customer in Toronto. So there are productivity benefits there too. Now, I think on the customer experience side, I suspect that this will be the moment where more customers, again, we're all digital customers, and I think we'll see this switch where more customers will go to digital first and will trust in some of those capabilities, provide those companies that invest in those capabilities, and that will be their first port of call, because I think digital service has had to grow up really quickly. You mentioned a great one, which I think is a new normal thing, which is online shopping and home delivery. Like I am right there with you. I think you and I were eating up a lot of time in the Salesforce roundtable, swapping stories about things you bought online. But I can tell you, I haven't been to the wine store and I don't know how long. I haven't gone to the big box retailers. Like, it's just so much easier to have those things delivered. I could do it from my couch. It's always been a hassle. I've never looked forward to it. And this is I'm happy to pay a little bit more for the delivery. I don't think I'm going back. And I think a lot of other customers are probably like that too. So I think there's some things, but I think that there's going to be no more middle seats on airplanes, or people won't stay in hotels, or there'll be no more conferences? No, I personally think those things are probably going to go right back to where they were. But I think you use the phrase like sort of pre-vaccine, post-vaccine, and no epidemiologist, but or vaccine expert, but I would say that's kind of, I think, the tripping point where people feel comfortable going back to the way things were in a business interaction, a business world perspective, is once there's a vaccine out there and it's widely adopted. So,
when we think about organizations and what they've learned through all this, and you've touched on it already, the modern workplace is going to change, and there's no question about that. Consumers are going to change. Is it a good thing that we're not expecting the same? In other words, is there a virtuous circle at work here where as companies are kind of forced to go back on and do more things online, they get better at it, and then consumers have a better experience, and on it goes. You set the flywheel in motion that finally the interactive chats that today are pretty lame and just first level actually become really useful. Do you see that in the future, perhaps?
I do. I think, one of the ones it just occurred to me, but I think a part of the new normal is, things that were the old normal for you and me, because I know you and I both worked remotely for a long time, but I do think that is going to be part of the new normal of work. You've seen a lot of companies in the U.S. and Canada announce that they're not only not requiring people to come back this year to the office, but in some cases, in some pretty big name companies saying we're never going to require people to come back to the office. And I think I know
I'm
there are
skeptical
people.
of that. I'm a bit dubious about that.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah. Never say never. I don't know.
It's true. I think it's, well, you're right. I wouldn't put it past them to change their tune on that. Yeah. But, I do think it's, this is going to put a lot of pressure on the physical workplace as a thing. I'll tell you, my own company, with Heather, we are having this debate right now, and I don't think we're alone, which is, hey, we've got expensive office space, and our employees live in, most of them live in Austin, Texas, and it's there's a lot of traffic, and they love the fact that they don't have to spend an hour each day commuting, and they feel more productive, and they're happier. Now, there is a lot lost, I think, by not being together, and so we got to figure out how do we fill that gap from an employee experience and engagement perspective. But I think most of the people I talk to are loving the flexibility of work from home. They do miss the water cooler. They do miss the, grabbing lunch with colleagues and meeting with customers live in the office. But it's, the benefits, I think, kind of outweigh some of the negatives. And so I think that's going to be part of the new normal. I do think, to your question, though, this idea of the flywheel, in some respects, is COVID like this. Is in some way a business kind of forest fire, which, new growth emerges from that, and suddenly it's healthier and it's more robust. I think in some respects, absolutely, this will start the flywheel around things like frontline empowerment that companies have been they've wrung their hands for so long about heaven forbid we trust people to do what's, to use the muscle between their two ears and to actually use their own judgment to engage our customers. It's much better if management tells them what to say and what to do. And they realize when they're forced to trust what their people do by way of delivering a good customer experience, they actually deliver a great customer experience. And the reps are actually really capable. And they've been, you thought you were supporting them, but really all you were doing is hamstringing them. And I hear that from a lot of companies right now. We never realized how great the people we hired are, and how when we left them alone, how much positive feedback we heard from our customers. And that's, it's a shame that it took an event like this for them to realize that. But like a forest fire, where it's painful, coming out of this is new growth, or the digital behaviors, or virtual selling. The bad side of it, of course, is that I think so many smaller companies, whether that's the local retailer or that's the small startup that's just starting to get its legs, will not survive this. And I think that is harmful from an innovation perspective, because I think that's where a lot of the great new thinking comes, is not from the big companies, but from the small challengers out there. And when there aren't small challengers out there, I think you will see less innovation. So I think that is a real downside to this. But I do think you're right. I think we'll look back on this time and say, there were things that were, maybe some of them were happening anyway, but boy, this really catapulted them into the future. And this became the new way we work, or the new way we engage with companies as consumers.
Another thought I have about returning to office, I think everyone's starting to look at that with rose-colored glasses. Oh, wasn't it great to be in the office? And even if you return to the office, and I'm going to call pre-vaccine, you're going to be in your office. You're not going to be out having slate cakes from Costco. You're just going to be isolated in your office because, as we continue to learn that it's airflow indoors. So I don't know. I think people are almost romanticizing what it was like to be in an office. It's funny. Last question for you, and thanks for being generous with your time. Top 3 pieces of advice to leaders who have customer service call centers, virtual or real or physical or whatever, 2 starts and 1 stop for creating a fantastic customer and employee experience. What are those kind of, start doing these 2 things and stop doing this thing? You've already touched on a few of them, but crystallize them a little bit.
Sure. Let me combine a start and stop together, and then I'll do the other start after that. So the start and stop, I think one of the things that we in the research, I think when people read Effortless Experience and they get familiar with that research, I think sometimes big companies in particular, and I find especially big companies in regulated spaces, so banks or insurers or folks in the medical industry, they get paralyzed because they look at what the message is, which is simplify, reduce effort, reduce friction for the customer, make things easy. And they fall into this vein of thinking being easy to do business with as a big legacy regulated company is really hard. And so they don't do anything. And so I think one of the stop starts I would point to is the fact that when we studied effort, we found that 2/3 of effort from the customer's perspective was actually, it was not a function of, 1/3 of effort was a function of what they had to actually do during the service interaction, that they had to call back the company repeatedly to chase down an answer, that they went to the website that failed them and then they had to pick up the phone to call, that they got transferred from, across 5 different departments before they found somebody could fix their problem. That's the physical exertion side of effort. And some of those things actually are hard to fix in a big legacy company. But 2/3 of the effort equation was a function of how the customer felt about what they had to do. So in other words, only 1/3 of effort is reality, 2/3 of it is perception. And so what that means, if you get down to it, to really crystallize it, is it comes down to the language that your frontline employees use when they engage with their customers. Now, be really careful here. I'm not talking about being polite to customers. And by the way, I'm not going to suggest you to be impolite to your customers. You should absolutely be polite to your customers. But we as companies teach our frontline employees, our retail store staff, our call center employees, our field technicians. We teach them soft skills. We teach them those, how to be respectful and polite and empathetic and represent yourself and the company in the best way possible. You should keep doing that. What we're talking about is using language in a purposeful way that helps the customer think or believe that the effort was less than it really was. And so what we found is that there are certain languages. A lot of the work we do at Tether there's certain language in terms of utterances, turns of phrase, go-to responses that agents, frontline agents, especially in call centers, use all the time that increase the perception of effort. So one class of that language is what we call powerless to help language. So this is when agents hide behind policy. Michael, there's nothing I can do. Michael, the policy prevents me from doing that. I'm sorry. That's against our policies. I'm sorry. You'll have to write a letter. I can transfer you to my manager. There's nothing I can do to help you.
Yeah. And can I help you? And can I help you with anything else? That's the thing.
That's right. You didn't help me resolve your issue.
You didn't help me with the first thing.
Exactly. Is there another thing I could help you with? Because I can't help you with that.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So that language, not surprisingly, drives customers up the wall. And we found statistically, it increases effort, the perception of effort dramatically, but it happens every minute of every day in every call center in the world, all across the call center. There are reps hiding behind policy and using policy as a shield. Now, what you can do is replace that language in doing it through coaching and training your reps with what we call advocacy-based language. So advocacy is it's not hiding behind policy and saying what you can't do. It's talking about what you can do. So even when your customer calls up and asks you for a refund or an out of warranty service item or something you're going to have to say no to, when reps leave the conversation with, Michael, let's see what we can do to figure this out together. Let me see what I can do to help you here because I want to get you back on track. Even if the answer you get is exactly the same, that I'm not going to give you a refund, I'm not going to give you a warranty service, the perception from the customer is that this is a lot easier because here's a rep who is seeing what can be done. They're taking control. They're advocating for me. They're representing me versus they're just hiding behind policy and throwing up a brick wall. And that simple turn of phrase is really, really powerful. It is statistically demonstrated to reduce effort. And when we reduce effort, customers churn out less often. They spread less negative word of mouth, and they're more inclined to buy new things from us and to spend more money with us, even if the ultimate answer they get is exactly the same. So that is a stop using powerless to help and hiding behind policy. Start using language rooted in advocacy. If you don't know where that's happening or which of your reps are using that language, we'd be happy to help you because that's kind of what we do is use machine learning to find where that's happening at an agent level. The other start I think is I wouldn't say more of an aspirational one, but I would steer people towards the idea of leveraging more what I might call ambient data or found data to understand the customer experience. For a really long time, companies have been in this mode of deploying, surveys. Here's a survey when you visit the website. Here's a survey when you go to the store. Here's a survey when you call the call center. Tell us what you think. And what I'm hearing from companies, and this has been going on for a long time, is that survey response rates are on a secular decline. Most big companies tell me that their survey response rate, they're lucky if they break 10%, on any given day. It's usually in the low single digits. And so what a lot of companies are starting to look at is rather than asking our customers to tell us about the experience, if we're recording the phone conversation we just had, if we have the chat interaction we had with the customer, if we've got the email exchange we had with the customer, if we got their social media, comments or their user reviews on Yelp or Google or Amazon, let's use that data to understand the customer experience and specifically what we can do to improve. That is actually way less of a burden on your customers because you're not asking them to repeat themselves. And the reality is that, when you're dealing with small response rates, you start to question the validity of the data, right? Which customers responded to the survey? Is it just the happy ones, the really upset ones? Is it the average customer? So much better to just use the data we've already got to understand our customers' experience and to do something about it. And again, that's I think a place where I see a lot of leading companies starting to invest, not just speech analytics in the contact center, but actually heads of CX, heads of marketing, heads of product now starting to ask, how do we use the data we've already got to understand the customer's experience and do something about it? And so again, that's a topic I'm really passionate about and something we'd love to talk to folks about at Tether. If they'd be interested. But it's, I think, a fascinating new frontier to understand customer experience.
Well, listen, this is a great conversation with no surprise to me. We had a great conversation together the first time. Such interesting thoughts. And you've mentioned Tether a couple of times. How do people learn more about you or get in touch and maybe
sure.
the conversation?
Yeah, so Tether is spelled Tethr, and as you just said, because we're a startup, we couldn't afford the extra vowel. So that's why we spelled that way. The Tether, TETHR.com. So you can check us out there if you'd like to learn more about what we do. Helping companies understand customer experience using their found data. Be happy to talk to you about that. And if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm always happy to continue the conversation. Send me a LinkedIn invitation, mention that you heard me on Michael's podcast, and you'd like to be connected, and love to be connected with you and answer any questions you might have after listening to this podcast.
Well, fantastic, Matt. Listen, it was such a treat catching up with you on the podcast. I look forward to the day we can do it in person. But until then, be safe. Best of luck. Congratulations on what you've accomplished already, and I'm sure that we have great things to look forward to. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. Take care, be safe, and hope to see you live sometime soon. That is something I'm very much looking forward to returning. So I don't want this virtual thing to be the permanent new normal. But thanks again for inviting me.
Thanks to Andrew and Matt for being my guests in this episode, and to Omnose for their generous sponsorship. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform. Please rate, review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of LeBlanc Company Inc. You can learn more about me on www.leblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a safe week.